Hello, welcome back again, and we're going to talk about the second half of topic two. We've been looking at the Islamic world. Now I want us to look at the sub-Saharan African world. So this is lessons 5 through 8. I should be able to do this in one video. So here we go. Okay, lesson 5 asks us to look at the early geography of Africa, the early civilizations that were there, a couple of the early kingdoms, and the influences that the Mediterranean had on North Africa. So as far as geography goes, Africa could be divided up into sort of a layer cake, where if you find the equator that runs through Central Africa, as you go north and south, you have tropical rainforest. Then it sort of eases into these tropical grasslands called savannas. There's lots of grass and there's enough rain for some trees. That's where a lot of the wildlife that you associate with Africa, like the giraffes and the elephants and all that, live there. And then north of that is a region called the Sahel. North and south is called the Sahel, which is the edge of a desert. And then in the north, you have the largest desert in the world, the Sahara. South, you have the Kalahari and the Namib deserts. So it's kind of a layer cake like that, with a lot of savannas. The main landform that you have in Africa is a plateau. So it's an elevated plain. So most of Africa is relatively flat. There are some mountains in the north, the Atlas Mountains. Then you have the Ethiopian highlands. Then you have the Drakensberg Mountains in the south. You have some mountains along the Great Rift Valley. The coastal areas of Africa tend to be fairly fertile. North Africa has a Mediterranean climate, and so it's very much like Italy and Greece and those other countries. And South Africa has a very temperate climate and lots of fertile soil. Of course, the earliest civilization that you find in Africa is in the Nile River Valley. One of the things that kept a lot of explorations from Africa happening are these cataracts, these waterfalls and rapids that you find in some of the rivers as they're coming down from these highland areas, these plateau areas. People originated in Africa, particularly in East Africa in the Great Rift Valley, which more or less runs from like Ethiopia through Kenya down through Tanzania. There was a huge movement of people from West Africa about a little over 1,000 years ago that were Bantu speaking, that spread into Central Africa and South Africa. So Bantu is one of the most widely spread language families within Africa. Some of the early civilizations where we mentioned Egypt. To the south of Egypt, in what's now Sudan, there was a region called Kush or Nubia, which was a region that rivaled Egypt at one time. Their capital was at Meroe. They actually conquered the Egyptians briefly. Then in North Africa, you have the Phoenicians who settled. There were a Canaanite people that settled particularly with Carthage in that region. Then Rome came in, and part of their conquest around the Mediterranean, they took over. This is where Christianity was introduced into North Africa. And then, of course, starting in the 7th century, you have the expansion of Islam into this region. And so today, most people in North Africa are Muslims. With West Africa, starting in the 800s, you start to have the development of some trade kingdoms that controlled the salt and gold trade between, sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. So you had some fairly complex empires develop. So gold and salt, those were the main things that were coming out of West Africa, and it made these people very rich. You had a kingdom of Ghana that formed between the year 800 and about the middle of the 1000s. You have Mali that existed from the 1200s to the middle of the 15th century. And then you have the kingdom of Songhai. So all of these are places that are located in Western Africa along the Niger River. They were quite wealthy. In fact, under the kingdom of Mali, Mansa Musa was probably the richest man in the world. His pilgrimage to Mecca basically deflated the prices of gold worldwide because he spent so much gold going to Mecca and coming back. So Timbuktu on the Niger River became a major cultural center in West Africa. Most of these kingdoms, a significant number of people converted to Islam, although you still had a lot of people that practiced native religions. In East Africa, there's trade routes that basically are connected with the desert and the Red Sea. The Kingdom of Aksum, and then later the Kingdom of Ethiopia controlled that kind of Horn of Africa and Red Sea trade, and did a lot of trade with Arabia. There are a series of trading cities that started to develop in the 900s, around the 1000s, along the eastern coast of Africa, from what's now Kenya and Tanzania, Zanzibar, those places along the east coast, mainly trading in the Indian Ocean with India and other places farther east. Some of these places are like Mogadishu, Mombasa, Silwa, Dar es Islam. There's still a very, very heavy Muslim influence that's there. One of the things that didn't happen in East Africa is this Bantu African culture with Arabs and Persians combined and produced a language that's called Swahili. It's a trade language that people learned that was fairly easy to pick up, and that's now the official language of Tanzania. Lots of people in Kenya speak it, so it's still very, very widely used today. And then in South Africa, on the Limpopo River, you had the Great Zimbabwe, which is kind of a mysterious group of people. We really don't know a lot about them, except that they did control the gold routes from the interior to Sofala, which was one of the coastal cities. It was a significant place. There's a huge ruin that's in the country of Zimbabwe today that, impresses people still. So these were powerful people. They didn't leave any writing, so we don't really know a whole lot about them, except that they did control the trade routes. So with Africa, the big thing was trade, commodities that people needed that they didn't have in other places, and getting them to the Middle East and to the Mediterranean world. Okay, Africa is a very diverse place, and so I want to touch on some of the things that do make it diverse. Families in Africa generally tend to be nuclear. People generally tend to live with just their parents with the children. Sometimes you have extended families where you have grandparents, uncles, other people that are there. But for the most part, people tend to have nuclear families. There are two different ways that people trace descent in African culture. One is through the father, which is a patrilineal tracing. The other is matrilineal, where they trace it through the mom. And then, of course, they have groups of people that they have close kinship to, lineages, which we would call clans. So you have groups of families that share common history or background. Traditional government in Africa, and this, of course, is before modern countries started to develop in Africa, was usually based on very small local decisions. You have elders within communities that govern through consensus. In other words, they argue it out, and then they make the decision that the group would follow. As far as religion is concerned, the people in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, tended to lean towards animism, this belief in spirits and nature. But of course, as time went on, Islam began to spread down from the north into places in Africa, particularly West Africa and East Africa. And Christianity was introduced by missionaries within the 1800s, 1900s. So a very diverse system. In fact, in some places, people kind of blend some of these traditions together. Most places in Africa, in North Africa, you did have certain languages, but in sub-Saharan Africa, they didn't until Arabic was introduced into these regions. So people had to memorize things. So there were a group of people in West Africa called griots who learned the histories of families and their communities, and they retained things that go back centuries. So, remarkable memories. All right, so that concludes the notes for the second part of topic 2. So as always, if you have any questions, please get back with me, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.